Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. On the phone with me today, I have Dr. Prasad Kaipa in San Jose, California. Prasad is the author of the book From Smart to Wise. His lifelong passion has been to ignite the genius within. He's also taught executive education for academic institutions, including USC, Dartmouth, and the London Business School. Prasad, thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure, Angela. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, your work really focuses on igniting the genius within and also pursuing personal mastery to help other people find sort of their next significant step. And I'm curious, what's going wrong in your mind when someone feels like they're failing to reach their full potential?
When people recognize that they are not reaching their full potential, there are two kinds of metrics that go wrong. One is an external metrics, that is, we don't get the recognition that we desire, or people are not happy with our results, or sometimes we don't get the choice assignments we expect and were promised before. Internally, I think we have a sense that something is not right. We are not actually reaching our genius. So that means there is a sense of unhappiness, restlessness, and we become unsure of ourselves. We ask other people their opinion of our work and ourselves a lot. So these are the kinds of what you might call external and internal measures by which we can see that something is not aligned with our larger potential, and what we are doing doesn't seem to get us to where we want to go.
And do you find that this experience where we come to this realization or we start to feel frustrated and unhappy, does it typically happen at a certain time, or are there certain events that might precipitate this feeling?
I found that while people are in transitions, either personal transitions or professional transitions, obviously there can be uncertainty and doubt and, challenges that we may face. But it is not necessary that we are going through a transition for us to experience a sense that we are not reaching our potential. It could be routine work, but you wake up one day and you feel empty, and you feel like you have been working in that job or in that role for a long time, but it is not yielding the results that you want. So while transitions definitely trigger a sense of uncertainty, even while we are routinely doing what we are doing, unconsciously or subconsciously, we might begin to look at ourselves and say, this is where I wanted to be when I reach 40 or when I reach 50 or 3 years into my new role, but I'm not making it. So whenever we do a gap analysis, I think we begin to see that sometimes where we want to be and where we are, it may not meet our own internal standards.
Right, that makes sense. I mean, do you find that the best way forward at that point is to set a new goal, or is it to come up with a new plan to get to the original goal? I mean, how do people usually, how should we work through something like this?
I think this is a good time for people to get some external help. People like you and me, we work with people and who are either entrepreneurs or managers who are at this particular stage. Either they can get coaches, external coaches or internal coaches, or they can talk to their mentors. They can also talk to their manager sometimes and recognize, first of all, is the feeling that they are not reaching their potential, is it because of certain impatience they have, or are their goals too big to be achieved within a time, or they need to develop some new skills, new capabilities, and they haven't paid sufficient attention to grow themselves. So it can be for any reason, but instead of just looking at resetting my goal or trying to understand myself, it's also important to get an external perspective, because I'm not reaching my potential all by myself. I work in an environment, other people have an influence, so it will be good to get the context.
It makes me think, there was a talk that you gave, I think it might have been a TEDx talk, where you mentioned something, I'm probably going to get the language a little bit wrong, but you said, what got you here, like what made you successful to this point, won't take you to the next point because the situation has changed.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes me think of a similar thing when we feel like we're maybe not reaching our purpose, or we're not sort of reaching our personal mastery, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
You also have a book called From Smart to Wise, and you talk about specifically connecting to your noble purpose. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what does it mean to connect to your noble purpose? And if we're listening and we don't know what ours is, like, how can we go about finding that noble purpose?
While I answer this second question, if I might pause for a minute and go back to what you raised. You raised a very important point. What got us here won't get us there. I have been using a phrase which looks oxymoronic, but it makes a lot of sense. I call it core incompetence. Each one of us have core competencies and success recipes and core strengths that get us to where we are. But after some time, that core strength, when we have not paid sufficient attention, it gets taken for granted. And we use that as like a hammer, and we keep looking for nails everywhere. In that particular time, I think we need to develop a second capability. We need to be able to develop a second core strength. And now that we are in the current position, even though the current set of skills helped us to get here, now that you are a vice president, you need to learn how to be a president. It is no longer about, being the vice president and the division manager and the general manager. But unfortunate part is, whenever we are nervous, whenever we are upset, whenever we feel we are not reaching our potential, we use the same set of skills that got us here harder and more often, and we don't really re-examine whether the strength that we have, that has become our signature strength, has become the nail in our foot. I think that kind of a pausing, re-examining, and getting reflection, both internally and from other people, is what gets us to where we want to go. And of course, Marshall Goldsmith wrote a great book with the exact title, What Got Us Here Won't Get Us There. And that's all the same thing. Find out where your core competence has become your core incompetence. And that is something that most of the time we are really blind to. And that's the reason why I said we need an external validation and external support like coaches.
That makes sense. And I think, it's probably kind of a scary experience to realize that something that was always a strength is no longer as much, it's not helping you in the same way, and that you have to come up with something new.
Exactly. And that's the reason why when we have those questions, we need to re-examine what is my purpose, not my vision, not my strategy, not my goals, but my purpose. What is purpose? Several times people question. If we ask, what are we doing? What do we want to achieve in the future? It points to our vision or our goals. But if we ask ourselves, why do I want that vision? Why do I want to get to that place? Then answer to that why question might give us a sense of our purpose. And only thing is, many times we look at it and say, why we want to do is to achieve something. But if we really examine in nature, if we really examine in large companies, any of them, when we try to achieve our goals and try to ask these simple why questions, normally we find out what we want to do, what we want to achieve, where we want to go, are not some things we can do all by ourselves. For example, the trees, show beautiful flowers. Now that it is spring, everywhere you see, there are some wonderful flowers. Mm-hmm. And those flowers attract bees, and those bees, take the pollen out of the flowers and cross-pollinate. And through that cross-pollination, the spring blooms, but over a period of time, you also get what you need, and the trees prosper over a period of time. There will be more trees, because of the flowers and because of the fruits and the seeds that come out of it. These trees propagate in a larger region. So if you ask a question, why do trees, bloom, and why do trees give fruits? The purpose is larger. Number one, cross-pollination, and they serve the human beings, and they serve animals and birds. But because they serve others, they get served in turn. It may not be direct result, it may be indirect result. So to come back and connect it back to your question, noble purpose is to recognize each of us cannot reach where we want to go and get what we want to get all by ourselves. We are interdependent social creatures. By helping others, by serving others, by making a difference to what other people's projects are and what other people need, whether it is in the workplace or in the community or family, we actually get our stuff taken care of. And that's what normally is called enlightened self-interest. So by connecting to noble purpose, we get multiple people helping us to reach our own goals and our own visions. And that's probably the most effective way we can reach our full potential.
Oh, that's wonderful. It makes a lot of sense. Well, as I've worked with job seekers, you mentioned things about purpose and priorities, and I've really noticed that it seems like our purpose and our priorities may change over time as we get older or different things happen. And you wrote an ebook called Discontinuous Learning, Igniting Genius Within by Aligning Self, Work, and Family. And it made me wonder do you find that sort of changes in our own personal lives have an impact on us professionally and on what's important to us?
Definitely. I believe that we use the same brain, we use the same mind, we use the same body, both at work and family. So same tools are being used, same emotions and thoughts and feelings are generated. It is just that sometimes we try to create an artificial boundary about work and family, but it doesn't always work. I was working with a senior VP in a large company in the Pacific Northwest, and his boss told me that this guy was up for executive VP promotion, but before they give that promotion, he wanted me to work with him and coach him to find out what's going on, because his productivity and his effectiveness and output has dropped significantly in the past 3 months, and they can't see anything wrong in his behavior, but they do feel something is missing.
Okay.
I tried to approach him, I tried to talk to him, and he kind of put me off, and his relationship with me was pretty formal in the first 2 meetings. One day I asked him to meet me outside of work, and then over drinks. Then I asked him, my coaching with you is not working out. Maybe you and I don't have any chemistry, and maybe it is time for you to talk to another coach, because I can't seem to help you. He said, Prasad, not only you, nobody can help me, because it is nothing to do with work. But I can't talk about what's happening to anybody else. I said, fine. Let us assume that, what you call, I can't help you. Let us take it for granted that whatever you are going through, you will have to suffer. But can you at least share it with me? Then he shares something about his, teenage kid who got into drugs, but he is such a prominent person in the community, he cannot talk to anybody else about it, and he doesn't know what to do, and his son is obstinate, and his son is unreachable. Then we ended up talking about what I go through with my children, and then we talked about a friend whom I have in Betty Ford in the Los Angeles area. They have a drug addiction treatment, and, talking with him about some of these things, saying, I hope it works out. I don't know whether I can, I have helped or I can help in this area. Obviously, this is something which you need to deal with. But if you need any recommendation, let me know. Just to make a long story short, he went ahead. He did call me. He did get his kid admitted into the Betty Ford Hospital. But in the meantime, his performance went up significantly, because a big headache was taken off his plate. And, I did not coach him. When I ran into him a year later in the airport, he was already a president of a division. He was doing exceedingly well, and he was really grateful for the suggestion that I made. And but he said, because I know about his personal stuff, he felt uncomfortable working with me as a coach. But he said, you helped me more than any other coach could have helped. So why this story I told you is that our priorities and purpose may shift over time, but we need to recognize what looks like they are completely disconnected. We are one person. We can't be one person at work, one person at home. We may pretend to create those artificial boundaries for some time, but the spillover happens more commonly and unconsciously, though it may take time for us to recognize it.
Oh, it's interesting. And I'm sure that the conversation that you had with the person you mentioned, I'm sure it helped, because it sounds like he probably felt very alone with this issue, because he couldn't talk about it and he couldn't seem to find a solution to the problem. So it seems like it was sort of bleeding into his work, so to speak, and really impacting him in multiple arenas of his life. So that goes back to the idea of external help. And it sounds like you were really able to provide that external help by giving him those suggestions and kind of pointing him in a new direction on this issue. So that's a really great example.
Yeah, thank you. It is like a difference between coaching and mentoring. In that role, I was not coaching him. I was just kind of mentoring him and giving a small suggestion. And that helped a lot in that respect. And he's still, it is 12 years since I worked with him. He still remains as a friend, and he reaches out once in a while for suggestions. So I do agree with you that in a different way than a coach, my suggestions were very helpful for him.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, so one of the other types of people that you work with is entrepreneurs. And you gave a TEDx talk titled Secrets of Successful Entrepreneurs, which I really enjoyed. And there was something that you mentioned that really stood out to me. You mentioned that one of the secrets of success was to stop obsessing about success. And I know that I can relate to this a lot. I'm sure the folks listening can also relate. But tell me from your perspective, why is it important for us to stop obsessing about success in order to sort of fulfill our success in a way?
Right. It is connected with what we talked about a little bit earlier also, Angela. When we are obsessing about success, whom do we think we are? We feel like we are a failure, so we obsess about success. That means there is some amount of loss of self-esteem and self-worth that really makes us at a subconscious level, unconscious level, feel like, I need a success. So in other words, when I'm obsessing about success, I come across to people as a failure. And so the key part is to recognize that when I come from a place of success, I have seen this many times. When my plate is full, I have lots of engagements, I'm really busy. That's when people come to me and say, hey, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And I say, hey, I'm overwhelmed with too much work. But they say, hey, that's the reason why we want to come to you. You must be really good if your plate is so full. So other people say, wait a minute, I have a lot of time. But why nobody comes to me is because somewhere people associate when you are free, when you are really wanting to help somebody else, that the extra energy that you put in to get that deal, that over-anxiousness or that need that we have is not something people look at it as, hey, this person is really helpful. They look at it like this person is really needy or this person is really a failure. So he wants to or she wants to prove herself to be successful. I don't want myself to be an experiment to make her feel good or not good. So these are, psychological factors. Nobody explicitly addresses it. But you know that and I know that when we obsess about our success, somehow we are not acknowledging, appreciating, and accepting that we are already successful. May not be in this exact area, but we are successful people trying to help other successful people get better. I think that reframing is extraordinarily important, whether we are a manager in a company, and especially when we are an entrepreneur. Success attracts success. Positive attitude attracts more, positive results. These are some things that one needs to keep in mind.
That makes sense. I think that's a really powerful sort of mind shift. And when it comes to job seeking, I often will compare it to dating. And I try to remind people that, when you're out there looking for a job, that it is a two-way street and you want to evaluate the company as much as they evaluate you. But similar to dating, when you come across desperate, that's when you're not as attractive as a mate versus when you are confident and when dating is somewhat optional. That's when I think people tend to find a rush of requests all at the same time. And it sounds like such a similar comparison to me in terms of how that energy is perceived.
I like your comparison, the job as a date. Like, at least in United States or many places, you only have one relationship. What I mean by that is you have only one spouse at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, you only hold one job at a time. If I get upset with 10 interviews that didn't work out, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to really look for 10 different job opportunities. You need only one
Right.
to land the job. So just like a date, you only are looking for one appropriate, a person who loves you and who takes care of you.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, if we remember that we need only one job, 99 failures doesn't mean anything. The next job interview that you go to may be the perfect one for you. When you have that positive attitude, when you stop being desperate, as you pointed out, you become very attractive. So that means you need to ask questions and you need to actually interview them as well, whether they deserve you as an employee to that company, whether they have the values and they have the purpose and mission that connects with what you want. Like my daughter, when, she's young, she's 27, and she did not take up the first 3 or 4 jobs that were offered to her, saying, I'm really interested in a job that has got environmental impact or that has ecological impact, that has got some kind of either education or environment or a larger purpose as a part of it. Though, a person in LinkedIn offered her like $85,000 job, she refused to take up a part-time job in an educational company, and then she picked up another job in another company that has got, something that affects her values. So I have a feeling these days, younger job seekers, the millennials, have a lot more clarity on the purpose and the kind of work that they do. If they have that confidence and allow themselves to interview the potential companies as well, I think that will create much better opportunities for them to find a job that they're going to be happy about, not just gives them the right rank and the title and the salary.
You're right. That's such a good story. I appreciate you sharing. And I think when people do, walk away from jobs and wait for the right one, they're thinking about a more long-term vision of what it means to be successful and what they want their career to look like. It's not just about the title or the money. I mean, those things are nice, but they're nice when you're in the right situation. No amount of money can compensate you for being unhappy or, for working in a career that's not a good fit. Which, speaking of working in a career that's not a good fit, many of us, if we're looking for a job, it may be because we've lost a job and maybe we're unemployed and we're feeling really down about it. And I know you actually wrote a really great piece that was for the Harvard Business Review, and the topic was around recovering your credibility. And if we find ourselves in that situation, say we're unemployed and we're really feeling down, do you have any tips for us on how we might sort of recover our own credibility as we're going through the job search?
Sure. I think that the credibility ultimately comes down to 3 things. One is what we are saying versus what we are doing. If the gap is too large, they will only they will only see what we are doing, but never pay attention to what we are saying. There was a great quote by Louis Cass. It said something like, people may doubt what you say, but they will always believe what you do. So if you want to recover your credibility, the first and foremost is see whether your actions are consistent with your words. And especially if you look at your past job opportunities and the jobs that you worked in and the companies that you worked for and the resume that you have put out there, please look at it and see whether the way in which you represented yourself in your resume, does that show what you have done, or does that show what you want to do? If you put too much of what you want in a new job that doesn't connect with what you have done before, it becomes much harder. Like there is a gentleman who was an entrepreneur whom I coached. He had his own consulting company with the two other partners. They were making about $30 million in a consulting, IT consulting in the Bay Area. And there were some difficulties between the three of them. And this person went ahead and joined the Kellogg Executive MBA program. And when he completed that Executive MBA, and he tried to look for jobs based on his MBA qualifications, even though he had a master's and a gold medal in engineering, and he was a CTO before, and the consulting company was all in IT. When he looked for some product management or marketing in some other areas, even with an executive Kellogg program graduation, he did not get any jobs in the area he wanted. But he always got offered the jobs based on what he has done with this new additional MBA, something to build upon that. So people look at what you have done. So make sure that when you are aspiring for a new job, create a viable, tangible bridge between what you have done and what you want to do. Create a story that actually bridges people's imagination, and it actually makes them feel, it makes sense. Now I know why a person of IT background wants to do marketing or wants to do finance. If you can imaginatively bridge that properly and recognize what other people would have thought about rather than what you think about, then chances of your job becomes a lot more. In addition to that, for your story to be credible, you also have to look at the second gap, which is your feelings and thinking. That means your energy, your passion have to support what you are looking for. Because you may say in a doubtful way, well, I got this degree, I got my master's in finance, so I should take that job. But they look at it and say, well, you are tentative about it. Your feelings do not necessarily show that you have really proper energy and proper enthusiasm for the new job. And so sometimes you don't get it. So there are three things which I look at. One is the courage to go after what you want. And this comes from knowing who you are, not just what you have done in the previous job. So you need to be able to courageously tell people, I was in IT. Now that I have worked as an entrepreneur for 3 years, I know I'm really good in finance, whether it is investments, whether it is, various related stuff to finance. I'm a wizard, and you need to give me a chance to see for yourself. And that's what I think I can really do, even though my background is so-and-so. So when you have the credibility and when you are committed to getting the new job and you have the courage to go after your dream, then people would be willing to give you a chance in area where you don't have expertise yet, because they believe in your energy, they believe in your courage, and because of your success in the past job in a completely different kind of a role, they will take that as, if you were successful in IT consulting, chances are you will be successful in finance. Let us give you a chance.
That's
These
true.
are the things which people need to pay attention to.
That's excellent. And I love the example that you gave. I'll tell you, I actually started in engineering, computer engineering, and I ended up
Oh,
in marketing. So,
wonderful.
and I went to business school in order to help to make that transition. So I also went through the process of rebranding and pitching companies on this idea that I haven't done this before, but I could do this. And it's quite a process, but I think, if you can really, like you said, work on your pitch and work on sort of explaining how you got from point A to point, Z, you can start to bring people along with you. And really, you just, again, need to find that one person who will give you a chance.
Yep.
Because once you switch to marketing, people think of you as a marketer.
Exactly.
Amazingly,
Right.
it usually just takes one switch. And often, we're making these switches to try to pursue a career that will make us happier. And you happen to be on the board of advisors for something called the Happiness Hall of Fame, which I was really interested to learn about. It's a nonprofit organization that recognizes people who've advanced the cause of happiness around the world. And I'm curious, was happiness always one of your goals, or did it grow over time as a goal?
For me, what I found is in Indian context that I grew up with, the Hindu philosophy. I was brought up as a Hindu, and happiness is an extraordinarily important part of the philosophy. It says, unless you come from happiness, you will never be able to bring happiness to yourself or other people, because happiness is your birthright. Children are brought up, children are born in happiness, sexual ecstasy, right? We are happy to have a child. That is the first step. Then when we nurture children, they grow very, very well when we have a happy family, happy childhood. And so that means it is not just that we are born into happiness, we grow in leaps and bounds when we are surrounded by happiness. And similarly, when we get into jobs or when we are contributing to other people, when we look for next job, as we said, we should not obsess with success, and we should actually look at interviewing them. And before that, we even talked about noble purpose. Like the flowers actually give out beautiful colors and beautiful way to attract the bees, so that their own pollination happens through the bees. So the key is, when we bring positive environment, happiness in the workplace, when we develop a certain way of being cheerful, optimistic, positive, and happy to do the kind of jobs that we do, promotions come easy. Opportunities come easy. We make friends very easily, and our life becomes much, much more joyful. So I would say happiness is the foundation on which good things happen to people. So it is not just a goal. I believe it is the foundation, and it is your birthright. And of course, we know that in U.S. Constitution, we talk about pursuit of happiness as a goal, but I would even go one step further to say that is where we come from, and that is where we need to propagate, and hopefully we'll end up in happiness. When we die, people are happy about the contribution that we have made as well.
Mm-hmm. I like that line of thinking. Well, if we're listening and we find ourselves feeling especially unhappy, especially if it's within the workplace, where can we begin to look to try to change our direction and to pursue happiness as more of a goal or a foundational sort of feeling that we'd like to have?
Excellent question, Angela. I think that is what you are asking is really key to igniting our genius or making our lives happy. And thank you for that. So what I feel is when we appreciate something, when we are happy about what we have done, that actually multiplies. Like I call it, what you appreciate appreciates, what you depreciate disappears. That has been, some kind of a motto in my life. Why is that? When I was, a father, young father at that time, I used to go to India often because I was teaching in this Indian School of Business. Before that, I was teaching in Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore. Even though I lived in California all my time as a father, I was traveling extensively to Asia and Europe. And each time I go, of course, my children miss me. But when I come back, I come back with a doll, or I come back with some book, or I teach them some different way of doing something. And when we were going in car rides, at that time there were no iPads and video disc players in the car. So what we do is we get in, and then I teach them a new way in which they can do multiplication, which I learned somewhere. And then suddenly, when I help them to learn this new mathematics and where they can do a 2-digit multiplication all in their head, suddenly they say, ask me some more. Give me some more questions. Give me some more. So the idea is, when you help them to be successful, when you help them to show up as people who know and who are happy, that actually increases their curiosity, their willingness to learn, their willingness to do the hard work. That is what actually Carol Dweck calls it as a growth mindset. Growth happens when we don't look at just the success as an outcome, but we look at the process of going through it. That means being happy, being enthused, being curious. These are all what you might call the positive mindset or appreciative mindset. I find when we are managers, or when we are parents, or when we are in the society, if we can spread that happiness, if we can spread that positivity, and same thing, like if you are a job seeker, and if you are looking for next job and you lost your job, and you are doubting, yourself, think about all the things that you did right, all the skills that got you the results. Look at and reflect on why things have gone well in the situations that have gone well. When you do that, what happens is, in a psychological sense, you deal with your self-critic much more meaningfully. Especially in coaching, you realize one of the most important parts is to recognize there is a part of us that does the things, that is action-oriented. There is a part of us that actually is witnessing and that judges, evaluates, criticizes, and comments. Sometimes in psychology, they say this is what is the superego, and that is like our critical parent or a critical teacher or an adult who shows up as this inner voice, always putting us down. When we learn to pay attention to not to this critical voice inside, but the appreciative, loving, nurturing voice which believed in us, which actually tells us that keep going, keep doing, this is a good thing, you are good at this, and you have learned this in such a short time, you can do something else, faster than other people as well. I think those are the kinds of things that make us not only happy, but helps us to recover our self-confidence and helps us to get on to appreciating ourselves and have the confidence to interview the date or interview the company and get the right kind of a job.
That makes sense. I feel like you're talking about really having this sort of refocusing yourself and having positive self-talk, instead of negative, to really put yourself in a better place so that you are attracting things that are more positive and that will in turn help to add to your happiness. I think that's a wonderful example and suggestions. Well, I have one more question for you. I know that you work with a lot of leaders, and we talked a little bit about how things change over time. And if we're listening and say we're currently in an individual contributor role and we're trying to transition into a leadership role, but we're struggling, maybe we're struggling for the company to take us seriously and to promote us, or maybe we've been promoted and we're struggling in that role to learn to be a better leader. I mean, what advice do you have for us? Just the first step, where should we turn if we find ourselves in this situation?
I think the first place to turn is to friends who know us in the workplace, maybe peer support, and see whether peers can help us to, who have been in this situation before, can give us some tips. Second, look for a mentor. There may be a skip level mentor for you. Who knows the culture in your organization, who knows the scenario, the context in which you have been given a leadership role or you are looking for a leadership role. And of course, I will come back to the third and most important sometimes is find yourself a coach. You don't get a coach when you are, failing. You get a coach when you are struggling and you have an opportunity to perform extraordinarily well, or you are doing very well, you just got promoted, you want to make sure you take right steps. That's a time for you to have an executive coach. And the last thing I would also say is whether you work with other people, who are a peer or a mentor or a coach, all depends upon your mindset. So if you can recognize that you got promoted because you have been successful in the previous role, or you are interested in being promoted and you are struggling to get that promotion or to be noticed or to be able to be taken seriously, what you may want to do is start acting as if your role model is telling you what to do. Like, think about who is the best leader or a manager in that organization you have seen, and try to emulate her or his behavior and ask yourself, what would this person do if they were to be in my role? This is called a role play. In your mind, if you can do role play about what would my mentor do in this situation? What would my role model do in this situation? And then boldly take those actions, because when you are struggling, your self-confidence may be low. But if you do what successful people whom you have taken up as role models or mentors, chances are those actions will get you to where you want to go.
Absolutely.
And of course, you have coach and mentor to help you.
Yes, absolutely. Prasad, this has been wonderful. Where can we go to learn more about you and your work?
You can go to prasadkaipa.com, and that's a place where there are several free articles, there are videos, and of course, you can write to me if you like, prasad@kaipagroup.com. You can reach me, and then I normally respond to most of my emails. And if there is anything else, obviously you can try to call me, 408-393-6984. And I travel extensively. In case you don't get a response to your email or phone call, leave me a text or leave me a follow-up email, and I'll try to get back.
Oh, that's perfect. Well, Prasad, I will put a link to your website in the show notes so that we can check out your website and all your talks. And thank you again for coming on the show. It's been really great.
Thank you for inviting me, Angela. And I enjoyed speaking with you. I appreciated the depth of your questioning and the amount of work you did to make sure my work is covered. I thank you for the amount of engagement that you are generating. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. And thanks everyone for listening. Please don't forget to help me out, subscribe on iTunes, and leave me a review.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.